Good morning. It's Monday, February 2nd. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 849 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FTD Morning Brief. If it feels like Groundhog's Day, that's because it is. Just like in that classic Bill Murray movie, we wake up every day and it seems like it's all the same. An American armada in the Persian Gulf that doesn't strike, a terrorist group in Gaza that is lost but won't give up its arms, Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon just about every day, and it can't seem to destroy Hezbollah, and a supreme rodent in Iran that doesn't seem to want to come out of its tunnel. Nothing seems to be changing, but I can feel the change that is coming, folks. Heck, today in the news suggested that the regime is now willing to talk. I can't believe it, which is all of it's a sign of weakness. So whatever happens next, the map in the Middle East is changing right before our eyes. Whether it means calm or peace or stability, I can't say, but I do believe that the axis of nasty actors that launched this thing back on October 7th, 2023 is going down. And on this Groundhog's Day, I can most definitely see their shadow. Tensions are sky high in the Persian Gulf. The Iranian regime threatened all-out war in the Middle East if the U.S. attacks. Trump snarled when the regime prepared to carry out military drills in the Strait of Hormuz. Israel's military chief, Eyal Zamir, flew to the United States for consultations, and the regime continues to prepare for what could be the biggest regional war since maybe ever. Some still believe that diplomacy can prevail. The regime has reportedly agreed to talk. Will it now stand down on nukes and missiles and proxies in a bid to hold on to power? If you ask me, the Islamic Republic isn't the Islamic Republic if it's not threatening its neighbors or the West. Some believe war is a foregone conclusion. There's simply too much firepower in the region for Trump to stand down. I don't know if that's true. The president doesn't exactly play by any hard or fast rules. Here's what I do know. Turkey's reported offer to take Iran's nuclear material and store it is the worst idea ever. It would give Iran an off-ramp from conflict without making any fundamental changes to its behavior. It would give the psycho regime in Turkey ownership of fissile stuff that it shouldn't have. And it would grant Erdogan more influence than he already has in the region. Hard pass here, people. Let's see the Iranian regime make some hard choices. Let's see consequences for the wrong choices. And let's keep Turkey the hell out of this. That country has done enough damage already. Okay, lots of news this weekend. So let's do a quick roundup so we're all up to speed. The Islamic Republic of Iran has designated every single European military as a terrorist organization. If that sounds bonkers, that's because it is. I might designate them as incompetent or non-factors, but terrorists, come on. This is a response to the EU labeling the IRGC as a terrorist organization, and the regime doesn't like it. Boo-hoo. More on Europe. Looks like the EU Commission has fired a senior official after a scandal involving, wait for it, Qatari influence and lavish gifts. This is all part of the Qatargate scandal that rocked Europe, but has now also spilled over into Israel, the United States, and beyond. Qatari cash is corrupt, people. It's dirty. It's downright filthy. And there needs to be a better set of rules for Western countries when it comes to this influential tiny emirate that continues to buy up governments left and right. Hamas claims that it has killed several members of Israel-backed paramilitary groups operating in Gaza. It's unclear whether the Israelis actually back these fighters. They haven't acknowledged anything yet, but it does not seem like good news for those of us cheering for the downfall of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Sticking with Gaza, for another headline, the Israelis have opened up the Rafah crossing in southern Gaza after a year of keeping it closed. The idea is to get more aid in, get serious medical cases out, and perhaps beat a path for the building materials and other goods that will eventually need to be brought in if we ever get to reconstruction. They did a pilot today and yesterday, so apparently things are working well, I guess, but we're going to see whether this pilot takes off and people actually start going back and forth across this border crossing. All right, more stuff going boom in Hezbollah land. At least 2 senior figures were taken out by the IDF over the last day or so. The Lebanese terror group will not go quietly in the night, and the Israelis are not willing to back down, so the action continues. Finally, the government of South Africa and Israel are engaged in a nasty diplomatic spat right now. The South Africans declared Israel's chargé d'affaires persona non grata the Israelis turned around and PNG'd the guy with the same position at the South African embassy in Israel. It ain't pretty, folks, but it's also not surprising. The South Africans are flat out enemies of Israel, and they've been very open about it since October 7th. I'm curious to see how this drama ends. All right, ladies and germs, it's time to bring on my friend Asaf Romirowsky. He's a repeat offender. He's a son of Philadelphia, and he's an all-around good guy. I wanted him to come on the program today because of the interesting battle now taking place between Israel and some of the NGOs operating in Gaza. Asaf is an expert on the UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, the worst of those NGOs, and he's also the head of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, which is a terrific NGO. So he has his finger on the pulse of a lot of what's happening on campus, a topic we've not talked about in some time. So without further ado, let's welcome Asaf back onto the program. Welcome to the FTD Morning Brief, Asaf Romirowsky.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Good morning. All right, let's talk about Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. They have just been blocked by the IDF in Gaza. So maybe just tell us, just on this group in particular, why did the Israelis block an NGO from operating in Gaza?
So let's put it into context. I mean, Doctors Without Borders, like many of the NGOs in the Gaza area, are not neutral organizations. They've been complicit with the population that they serve. As I talk about UNRWA at large, it's the case study of where the client has hijacked a service provider. That is also the same case when it comes to Doctors Without Borders. We've seen it all around. And their offense is consistently with what happens with many other NGOs, is that they refuse to give lists of people background checks. Historically speaking, we have asked many of the NGOs, we, the United States government and the Israeli government, we provide them with our own list saying these are repeat terror offenders, and can you double check, can you cross-reference? We have intel. They refuse to do so. So the pool of people that they consistently pull from is much smaller because they want to give them the stamp of approval of the fact that they are kosher. And every time these things happen, the Israelis wake up and say, well, we showed you. And now, once again, you have violated every possible cardinal rule and every red line possible by actually being complicit and supporting terrorism under the guise of a so-called diplomatic community. And with the Doctors Without Borders, it's even more offensive because, doctors are supposed to go do no harm, and exactly they do the opposite of all of this. And that's basically, a consistent effort, even though they claim that they are only taking care of really the good people, and really it's the Israelis who are the offenders in all of this. And that's the consistent game that we've been seeing for years.
Yeah, the Hippocratic Oath seems pretty hypocritical here with this particular NGO. All right, it's not the first time we've seen this, so let's bring it back to UNRWA. That's been the thing that you've been writing about for years. They're the original gangsters, literally. They're the OGs here. How has UNRWA violated the terms of the agreement with Israel? And I guess maybe just explain to us what's going on here, because they're no longer operating in Gaza or the West Bank, right?
Right. Well, they are a little bit, but they're basically out. I mean, on January 20th, we saw the collapse of the UNRWA building. Israel took down the building, brick by brick, symbolically, though they seem to have forgotten to charge them to their utilities for all these years, and they've been operating. So that's a separate situation. So symbolically, UNRWA is out of the area of East Jerusalem where it was located. Also, for the first time in a very long time, Israel has declared UNRWA as an FTO, which is a big shift in Israeli policy. That's only happened really as a result of the past 15 years or so. Has been an evolution of actually declaring UNRWA as an FTO. Post October 7th, they have fully declared that. UNRWA is still allowed to operate if they came in from the Egyptian Hamas side. I mean, they won't be allowed to go in through the Israeli areas. And so that's, they're trying still to play the game here. And they are very concerned after the threats of potentially being designated as an FTO here in the United States, what that means for them as far as their cash flow. But UNRWA, as you said correctly, is the OG. UNRWA has violated consistently for over 7 decades every possible semblance of what they were supposed to be. That is delivering any kind of what we call repatriation, reintegration, and resettlement when it comes to the so-called Arab Palestinian refugees. They've become complicit with every political group, including Hamas, within UNRWA, and they've actually, they are one and the same. UNRWA makes no distinction when it comes to the people that they hire. They are the largest employer of Palestinians. Like I said before, it is a case study where the client has hijacked the service provider. So it's no surprise that the same personnel are working out with all of this. And as you remember, as we saw with the GHF, one of the reasons that Hamas was balking at all of it, because the entire chain of materials going in and out in aid, of course, that was taken away from their own people, that is UNRWA people. We also saw evidence now we've had for years, and especially since 10/7, where UNRWA employees have been complicit with the hostage taking. Emily Damari's hostage taker was an actual doctor, apropos doctors, who refused to give her medical assistance, actually abused her. And now there's actually a lawsuit going after against American friends of UNRWA as a result of that as well. So UNRWA has violated every possible thing, yet they still claim that we, the United States, deserve to give them millions and millions of dollars, that they're the only game in town. And my big question is, which is really maybe something we can dive into, is what does all this mean, or how they're going to try to weasel themselves in vis-a-vis the Board of Peace? My hope is, of course, that the statements that came out of Marco Rubio and his team, that it's clear that UNRWA is designated as a terror organization, and we should continue with that line and not allow them to weasel themselves in. But I have concerns about that vis-a-vis our friends, so-called the Qataris and the Turks, trying to get them in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they'd love to get UNRWA in. I also can't imagine that our friends at UN would allow that to happen. And I can't imagine that the Board of Peace would be willing to do this. So I guess we're going to keep watching there. But I mean, I think just to remind folks, the Israelis found huge amounts of terror activity underneath the facilities of UNRWA, the major headquarters in Gaza. They found a server farm, all right, connected to an UNRWA building. It was plugged into their electrical system. And this server farm was actually powering some of the, the encrypted communications of Hamas. I mean, direct complicity. And so, the idea that the Israelis would be blocking them is not a shock, but the idea that somehow they can still operate in Gaza by coming across from the Egyptian side intrigues me. But I do get a sense that their operations are curtailed significantly, at least over there. By the way, they have an office here in Washington, and it does drive me crazy that they're able to operate here with impunity. Kind of feels like that needs to get shut down. All right, I want to ask you just about the wider dynamic of Western NGOs operating. I mean, you kind of mentioned this. They're operating to the rules of terrorists and not Western states. So big picture, let's just zoom out for a minute. How do we begin to change this? In other words, they become clients of the terrorist organizations that they're operating. I mean, they operate under the rules, for example, of Hamas. They operate under the rules. We see this in places like Yemen, right? If you want to get aid into North Yemen, you've got to work under Houthi rules. If you want to operate in South Lebanon, you probably need to operate under Hezbollah rules. How do we stop the cycle from continuing?
It's a good question. I mean, to your earlier point also about UNRWA, is also worthy of note that Yahya Sinwar, when the Israelis took him out, they had an UNRWA passport on his body as well. So as far as a get out of free jail card, only symbolically about how complicit they were with the mastermind of 10/7. But to your larger dynamic here, which is really the critical part. All of these UN NGOs have used and abused their so-called diplomatic immunity, and they serve their masters are the clients, and these are the terrorists. And we saw you've seen it also with UNIFIL when it comes to Lebanon. We've seen it with every other UN agency out there. The problem has to stop. From the gatekeeping, the hiring of the individuals, who's funding all of this. And so when you look at the entire dynamic and the entire how the UN is engineered all together, the people that they're bringing in are the people that are sympathetic to these agendas altogether. So the whole system is rotten from the start. And the monies that come in, again, this is where the laundering takes place here. This is where they've been fleecing us, the United States, for years. I mean, up until the first Trump administration, UNRWA has been historically taking from the U.S. taxpayer dollar about $400 million annually without special any kind of considerations and whatnot. Under the Biden administration during the beginning of the war, they demanded more special monies and more special aid. They consistently can claim that they're the only game in town. And the reason I mention that, because every one of these organizations says we're also the only game in town, and they would argue to their side is saying that's why we have the credibility. So we're the only ones who could deliver the aid. Anybody who tries to obstruct that infrastructure at large is really going to ruin and make sure that the people who actually need the aid are not going to receive the aid. That's not exactly true. They've been using it to way to launder information, to launder money, to launder aid all around. And they come in with their terroristic agenda, and then we're supposed to give them a pass because they have some kind of imprimato of doing some good and some kind of charity. These are all the trigger words that you see in the West all over the place in the media as far as justice and aid. And the West thinks that's a great idea. We need to help the people who are in need, and we give them money. But the infrastructure is wrong. The background checks are bad. The people that are coming in to this entire architecture come with their own clear agenda. That needs to stop. And I think in general, I mean, to my mind, the United Nations hasn't done a lot besides putting out a lot of smokes as far as coffee. All of that needs to change as far as who are the actual organizations that actually deliver and can actually do the actual work. There's not been a true needs assessment. And they come a lot with American NGOs, left-wing politics, and not to mention European politics that come with their own terroristic agendas that try to launder the money that way as well.
All right, it's a mess. We're going to keep tracking that. Talk to us about UNRWA, just broadly speaking, as it operates elsewhere, right? We read about and watched the photos and videos of the destruction of the UNRWA facility in East Jerusalem. We know that it's a lot harder for UNRWA to operate in Gaza, but it is still operating in Jordan, Lebanon, probably elsewhere, right?
Yeah. So there's still the gold standard of refuge units, as there always been. The Palestinian areas have always been the key critical parts, but UNRWA does indeed operate in Lebanon, Jordan, and parts of Syria. Even post Assad in some of these border areas, and they are operating still with the idea that there is Palestinian populations in those areas, in particular in Jordan and Lebanon. The so-called camps that they've been used have been also fertile ground for recruitment for terrorism, laundering of money, and things of the sort. The aid issues continues to be an ongoing problem for them, and not to mention, questions of monies that continue to go in there. And so the whole game that plays out here is also intrinsically connected to the ongoing demand of the so-called right of return. The right of return, which has been interpreted by UNRWA and UNRWA's advocates as a divine right. So no Palestinian leader has ever said we give up the right of return. They give them the impression that they can get, they get these monies, and they will also give them the impression there'll be some kind of compensation that they, when there is a full right of return, that somehow will take care of you as well. So there is aid, there's medical stuff that's going into that. It's less, relatively, again, put it into context, it's less nefarious as we saw with the exact complacency like we saw with 10-7, because those areas have not been honed on, but they still operate in those areas. And I would say that it's rotten from top down and bottom up. And I think that to my mind, again, going back to my earlier point, there needs to be a full needs assessment. People should be receiving aid not based on a fallacious status, but based on actual need. And UNRWA has refused consistently to do that. Historically speaking, every time I have asked and the U.S. government has asked, can we do an audit? They have balked at it. They can't tell you how much laptops they bought, how much aid they've delivered. They just say, we take care of the betterment of Palestinian society. And by the way, to that end, one of the main larger functions of UNRWA is education. The kind of education that they put out there is basically in line with the Islamist narrative. And that's how the indoctrination and the incitement takes place.
Yeah.
Apropos the Board of Peace, we got to make sure that all the schools in the Gaza area, which are predominantly been UNRWA schools, they need to be rooted from, all the way and scratched. And you got to start somewhere from a new educational system. The whole pedagogy needs to change.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, it's interesting to hear you talk about this, because the idea that UNRWA can still operate in Gaza, to me, just seems not realistic. I mean, half the place is maybe more than half is just flattened, right? So a lot of these schools don't probably exist any longer. The facilities are just not there. So we have kind of, at least on some level, the ability to start with a clean slate. It's not entirely clean. But also there is this sense that Israel can remove UNRWA with brute force.
Yeah.
And they have, right? And so I see, I see a little bit of tension there. But I got to say, overall, it looks like Israel's in a better place as it relates to UNRWA, just because it's got the physical advantage of controlling the territory, which it didn't before. And now I think the question is, can we win some of these other battles in terms of delegitimizing UNRWA? And then I think more importantly, creating some kind of an alternative to this agency that has been so poisonous in the conflict. It's perpetuated conflict. It's created more problems than it's solved. And that should really, I think, always be the yardstick through which we view all of these different entities and NGOs. I want to ask you just for a minute, because I know you focus obviously day to day when you're wearing your hat of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East executive director. I want to talk about campus. It's not something we've heard about a lot lately. So, I mean, it seems quiet or quieter. Is that what's going on here, or is there more than meets the eye?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it's quieter to your point, but not quiet enough. I mean, we've exposed a great deal of Qatari money that's still being involved. The universities in general are feeling the heat that's coming from the federal government. And so there's a bunch of universities that have signed some agreements with the federal government to try to get the pressure off their backs. We do have a window and opportunity for change. There's a great deal of lawfare that's happening in cases that are being adjudicated that we're finding now. Just last week, there was a court case that exposed in discovery how much Qatari money influenced Carnegie Mellon University, where over there, they were actually in the discovery documents, we saw that how much Qatar influenced the DEI hires. Again, how they weaponized DEI early on, and that relates to a court case that's happening with a Jewish professor at Carnegie Mellon.
I got to say, that's ridiculous. The idea of diversity out of Qatar, where there's zero diversity, and they're not actually interested in all the diversity. They're only interested in some kind of diversity. It just seems silly. Anyway, yeah.
100%. I mean, and look, and apropos Qatar, I mean, you're seeing what's been happening with Northwestern, a huge offender of this, where they basically bought the entire campus. The president, Schill, was the only one of the few presidents who actually signed an agreement with the Students for Justice in Palestine, basically a Hamas affiliate organization. And the guy they brought in was the guy who signed the original deal, opening the campus in Qatar. So there's a lot of money going on in Northwestern at large.
Yeah.
So problems still continue to take place here. Places like Colombia, which has always been hotbeds of anti-Semitism, continue to hire anti-Semites to teach anti-Semitism. Georgetown is having now a Gaza lecture series where they're having all the A-listers of anti-Semites who are running around and doing lecture series about Gaza and about the anti-Semitism. They're all experts on genocide. And so what I'm seeing now, to your earlier point, while the pressure has come, there's a little bit of, it's gotten a little quieter. My bigger concern is that we've seen a rise in denialism of 10-7, 2.5 years post the war itself. And so facts, as always, don't matter. Clearly, all those who were out in the encampments jumping up and down don't seem to care about anything happening in Iran. I mean, talk about the hypocrisy as far as crickets when it comes to freedom for the Iranian people. If it doesn't, if only Jews bleed, nothing else happens. But that's only the ongoing history of all of this. And so there is pressure. Some of the institutions are trying to ride the wave. That is to say, they're trying to use higher education operate like the industrial academic complex, as what I look at it. And so they've been trying to leverage their real estate. They've been trying to liquidate dollars, see if they can ride the wave and see if maybe we can put off the federal government as far as money's coming in and trying to get us to allow us to work. I'm a little bit skeptical about all that. They've been doing it for so many years. I am positive in the sense that you are seeing some recourse and a little bit corrective measurement in the campuses down south. And so we are seeing a beginning of a growth of what is considered to be the civic centers, classic old Common Core as far as teaching Western civilization. There is a correlation between the states who have been cracked down on terrorism, like in Texas and in Florida. For example, you can't get into the University of Florida. It's one of the top 10 schools around the country because it's a much more safer environment. And so there are some corrective measures that are indeed taking place. That being said, again, the environment is alive and well, and it's fertile ground for all of this.
Well, it's interesting that we're watching, instead of the outright insanity that was taking place after October 7th, it's now more of the 10/7 denialism, the revisionism. I think that seems to be the new trend, as opposed to the anger and the violence, although I wouldn't rule out a return of either one of those things if the war kicks back up into high gear. We're going to leave it there. Want to thank you, Asaf Romirowsky, for joining us again on the FTD Morning Brief.
Thank you.
All right, folks, in the immortal words of House of Pain, pack it up, pack it in. We're done. This is the part where I can tell you to read our website, all of it. Don't come back till you do. Okay, fine. Do come back either way, but you can certainly check out all the great new content on our socials as well. And please don't forget that contributions to FTD are, in fact, tax deductible. Head on over to ftd.org/invest to learn more. Tune in Wednesday for another fact-filled episode of the FTD Morning Brief. Will Iran be under attack? Will there be a deal? Will it still be Groundhog's Day? We'll find out. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer signing off for FTD.